The corroded key bit her palm as she forced the rusted hatch, skin grinding against iron teeth. The hill seemed to listen. The first shove gave nothing. The second scraped loose a century of salt and moss. Cold concrete breath replaced the faint sweetness of long-decayed hay from the farm sale, a change like stepping from story into verdict. If she opened this, she might expose a wartime choice that harmed civilians. The key's head bore numbers that existed in no public registry. You're here for the truth. Subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from. The hinge groaned. The darkness waited. She had not meant to buy a dented tin. It sat ignored on a trestle table behind cracked teacups and a jar of bent nails, priced as if emptiness were a feature. Inside lay the key, weighted with corrosion and history, heavy in a way that made her wrist adjust without thinking. The metal smelled of rust and old brine. Its bow showed a partial serial, a unit emblem scratched off to anonymity, and a small notch filed by hand, careful, deliberate. Back at her work table, she catalogued as she always did. Light at an angle, scale for reference, cotton swab to lift a skin of oxide. She cross-referenced her private catalog, decades of quiet acquisitions, and caught a faint echo. A coastal defense grid along a forgotten headland, commissioned, then never operated. The designation was there in a marginal memo, then erased by silence. The numbers on the key did not exist, and yet they persisted, like a watermark under blackout ink. The tin had a false bottom, pressed into place with a stubborn lip. She eased it free with a bone folder. Beneath, a folded fragment of blueprint, edges feathered, creases polished by worry. Pencil script along the margin read, "Not for inventory, only for conscience." The paper smelled of oil and salt. The pencil had bitten hard in places, as if the writer pressed conviction into cellulose. What she wanted was simple to name and difficult to hold. Truth. Preserved without spectacle. The blocks were familiar. Records vanished, the sites scrubbed from maps. A military story with no official mouth. So she walked the rumor roads. At a feed store, a man said the ridge near the abandoned rail spur was sealed. In a post office, a clerk said the hill listens, sometimes sends back your own voice. She marked each account without judgment. She took a compass and an old survey chart to the ridge. The rail spur cut brown through waist-high grass, the ties soft as bread. Century markers toppled, but their stones still counted distance, stubborn and exact. She paced from a cracked culvert, turned at a stand of alders, and sank her fingers into moss that bowed over a steel ring. The ring was cold. It resisted, then yielded with a sucking sound, like lifting a lid that had become part of the jar. The auxiliary hatch lay beneath, a steel disc scabbed with corrosion. The key slid into a throat slick with grit. It fit, but the lock did not turn with one motion. 4 rotational steps, each catching at positions she did not know. She pressed her ear to metal and listened to the tumblers breathe, the faintest shift like a moth inside a drawer. Time was running out, the sky bruised. One pause caught at a number that matched the penciled date on the blueprint, the winter of scarcity on the coast. She turned to that point. The second plate caught where the partial serial suggested. The third resisted, then clicked where her thumb notch found purchase. The fourth would not move until she aligned the small hand-fashioned notch with a nearly invisible scribe mark, a human correction to a machine. The hatch yielded. Stale air exhaled from below, dry and sour with concrete. Cordite's ghost faded to a rumor. A narrow stairway descended, steps cast with sand grit that still bit her soles. Power conduits ran along the wall, glass insulators intact, their dust an even skin. She descended, counting, the sound of her breath strange in her ears. As the door closed behind her, the world narrowed to stone, wire, and the weight of questions pressing inward. The air felt thick, but navigable. She tasted metal on her tongue. She held the key a moment longer before pocketing it, aware that the object had done its first work. The rest would ask different skills. The hill had listened. Now, it expected her to answer. She entered a corridor that turned once, then opened into a low room where the air settled like dust on skin. Labels had been peeled from drawers, tags burned to twisted stubs. Sanitization had done its work. She sought the officer who shaped this place. Absence tried to deny him. The weight of history sat heavy in her hands, and in that weight she could feel the outline of a person. She began as a cataloger does. Communications first. A desk with a field set, handset cradle empty, cord coiled with military exactness. The dials on the transmitter bore faint crescents where a thumb rested, day after day. She noted them. Use marks are signatures a file cannot erase. Ration lockers lined the next wall. Canvas boxes collapsed inward, still smelling of salt and old tallow. She lifted one lid. Inside, biscuits fossilized to brick. The ledger slot was empty, torn clean. She wrote that down. Missing books speak. A cot waited in the corner, made with a neat hospital fold, as if its owner had stepped away on inspection. The blanket's weave rasped under her glove. On the floor, a pair of scuffed boots faced the door. The person had put them there to leave quickly, or to look ready to. Beneath the cot, the concrete showed a faint rectangle of cleaner tone. She slid her fingers along the frame and felt a notch. A hidden switch clicked, soft as breath. The wall panel beside the cot released a fraction. She eased it aside. Inside, civilian artifacts slept under oilcloth, edges tacky with age. She peeled back one layer and found a child's drawing. Lighthouse in sepia crayon. Waves rendered as scalloped lines. A small figure on the shore holding a lamp. The paper smelled of schoolroom and time. A ring lay beside it, simple brass. Inside, inscription scribed by hand. For winter light. She turned it. The letters were shallow, earnest. A letter packet sat beneath, bound with medical tape, edges browned, adhesive turned to amber. She did not open the letters yet. Instead, she scanned the shelf for a record. A ledger lay further in, bound in cloth, corners darkened by touch. The columns were crisp. Supply shipments, tonnage, dates. Some entries were crossed through and renamed, redirected for relief. The dates traced the hard season the coast called famine winter. She felt the shape of defiance. The officer siphoned stores to feed a village. In this sealed room, an act of resistance had been practiced as routine. She flipped a half-burned dispatch from the drawer beneath the desk. The top corner survived. Seal perimeter. Deny egress. Blackout ink masked names, but the instruction was clear. Containment had a stamp of higher command. She looked again at the ledger. Some dates aligned with red pencil ticks. Others were blank, as if the writer could not bear to scribe the refusals with the same hand. On the floor, between desk and inner wall, 2 long grooves scarred the concrete. She traced them with her palm. A heavy crate had been dragged that way, toward a secondary door she had almost missed, flush to the wall, labeled in spidery paint, Vault. The paint had run and been wiped, as if someone painted it twice, once in haste, once in grief. Her knuckles brushed a metal box mounted low near the breaker panel. A hum startled the silence. The emergency generator nursed itself awake, coils whining, bulbs flickering to a thin, resolute glow. The bunker felt alive now. Lights stuttered in the corridor. A faint draft moved along her sleeve, bringing the ghost of cordite and machine oil. She froze, waiting to hear the shape of danger. Only the hum answered. Time was running out in a different way. Power can coax attention from a hill that listens. She cupped the ring in her glove. It warmed with her touch, a small sun with a promise carved inside. For winter light. A phrase that sounded like code and like prayer. The child's drawing trembled slightly in the air from the generator fan. She imagined hands folding these things into oilcloth, not as hoard, but as anchor. The truth was worse than rumor, she thought. It required choosing. She took inventory quickly, voice low to steady herself. Communications desk, rations, cot, hidden panel, civilian bundle, ledger, redirects align with winter, dispatch, deny egress, grooves to inner door labeled vault. Everything changed when the generator steadied. With the lights came sharper edges on each choice she might make. The hum wavered and faded to a thinner thread. Her certainty faded with it. She crossed to the inner door. The lock face bore scratches worn smooth by repeated tries. She pressed her ear to the cold metal and heard nothing but her own pulse. The weight of this discovery pressed on her. The hill had given her a path. It would not tell her which way to walk. She lifted the ring to the stenciled word vault and whispered, "We keep the light." Then she set her hand on the mechanism and leaned closer, ready to learn who had kept it before her. The inner door's lock face was a relic with memory. 4 rotating plates, lettered rims worn until the alphabet looked like shoreline. Present, eroded, persistent. She brushed grit from the grooves. The plates resisted as if they had sworn an oath to someone else. Open the vault to confirm the truth. That was the need. The blocks were personal. This mechanism had been built to answer to a specific mind. She read the scratches, hesitations, revisions, the shape of a hand that doubted and then decided. Time was running out. The generator's hum grew uneven, the air thickening with uncirculated breath. She studied in silence, letting objects speak. Lighthouse in sepia crayon. The ring inscribed for winter light. The ledger initialed in 2 hands. Some entries signed only O. Others ended in a precise A that cut down and away. A doctor's habit of finishing with control. 2 hands, 1 cause. She scribed it in thought. O and A, like coordinates on a moral map. The plates turned with a stiff, granular drag. She tried what the room suggested. Winter. The tumblers rolled, considered, refused, settling back with a dampened clack. She whispered the word again, measuring its weight. It felt too broad, a season, not a sentence. She tried beacon, thinking of a coastal registry and a light that names a harbor. The plates shifted, flirted with alignment, then slipped one notch away, as if to say, close, but not meant for you yet. She wiped her palm, tasted dust and metal, and glanced at the breaker panel. The dial dipped. Time was running out. Haven came next, a hope more than a clue. The lock answered with a dull refusal. She stepped back, listening to the bunker's breath. The silence outside was broken only by wind, but inside, her mind swirled with questions. The truth was worse than rumor when it required choosing which words to break. A small grill above the door crackled. She turned, every muscle ready. A wall speaker woke with a filament's glow, and then a voice, measured, low, and unhurried by fear. If you are here, you know why. If you don't, leave it closed. She let the words settle. It wasn't a warning to keep out. It was a test of conscience. She looked at the packet bound with medical tape. The adhesive had ambered to the color of honey left too long in sunlight. The tape tugged under her thumb and held, as if duty and secrecy had glued it. She had no choice but to decide. Break the seal or walk away from a code written to protect the dead by harming the living truth. The weight of the packet pressed on her far heavier than any price tag could. She slid her nail under the tape and felt it give with a soft, reluctant tear. The paper beneath released a sigh of old ink. The first page carried a hand that was careful and exacting. For those we cannot reach, we keep the light. She read it once aloud, voice steady in the concrete. The phrase fit the ring's inscription. It fit the drawing's shore. It felt like a promise, spoken at a door with people waiting on both sides. She turned back to the plates and entered the code not as a single word, but as cadence. Keep the light. Each plate found its letter with a tactile click, small as a heartbeat. The final notch settled and held. Something within the door withdrew, bolts unlatching in a sequence, heavy metal that had waited decades to accept this phrase from a living mouth. The vault door opened enough to breathe. Cold air rolled out with the smell of film emulsion, dry cardboard, and a clean brass edge. Not weapons, testimony. Shelves lined the interior, modest and exact, a library behind concrete. Reels in tins with grease-penciled titles, diaries bound in oilcloth, identity papers wrapped with twine, their seals unbroken. A ledger sat at eye level, its cover scribed only with names. She reached for the reel nearest her. The label read, Winter Light Series, Kitchen, Lower Hall, Shore. She set it back. There would be time later to hear the voices that survived in oxide. She opened the ledger of names. Columns were ruled with care. To the right of each family, a notation, evacuated or turned away by order. The red pencil that had marked denials had pressed harder, the strokes deeper, as if the writer believed pressure could change fate. A small envelope waited alone, front inscribed in a steady hand, to the next keeper. The paper was thin, the fold crisp despite the years. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter on a shelf edge. I sign this as O, because my name must not be the door through which others are hurt. I siphoned to feed. I sealed to prevent panic from turning into a stampede that would crush more. I followed and broke orders both. They split my dog tag for penance, half for the living I helped, half for the ash I keep. If you are here, then the weight is yours now. Keep the light. Name only with consent. Do not let the spectacle devour the truth. She read the page again, slower, hearing a cadence like the speaker's voice. She looked deeper into the vault. An ash box sat on a lower shelf, small, brass-tagged, inscription scribed with the same hand, for the ones who did not pass the threshold. She did not open it. Some doors open inward, some open inside you. The truth was worse than rumor because it left no heroes untouched, no villains pure. The officer had opened the floodgates for some and closed them for others, and a doctor had stood beside him with a ledger and a lamp. She must decide who hears this and how. The hill had listened. The vault had answered. Now the living world would ask its own questions. The vault's quiet did what courtrooms try to do. It asked for truth without spectacle. She wanted to honor the dead and protect the living descendants. The blocks were real. Names could reopen wounds, and the law could punish those who brought light to sealed history. She set a diary on the shelf's lip and let her thumb trace the indent where a candle had rested. Wax pooled and picked away. Families hid under tarps in supply trucks. The first diary's hand was hurried, vowels slanted by cold. We memorized birthdays that weren't ours. Winter bit our lungs. The driver called us crates until the gate. A sketch of a lighthouse margin noted, "Keep breathing when the lamp turns." She pictured children whispering new names until they fit like shoes stolen in necessity. The doctor's record lived beside it, staccato and clinical, yet trembling at the edges. Triaged by hunger index, by exposure time, by shell distance, by light availability. She read a line twice. For those we cannot reach, we keep the light at the harbor. The ring on her finger felt heavier. The weight of history sat heavy in her hands. A tin reel labeled Directive Night waited near a battered projector. She lifted the reel, threading it through a hand-cranked path. The bulb inside the box was dead, but the speaker could still speak. She turned the handle. A coded broadcast broke into the bunker, crisp with authority. All units maintain containment. Seal perimeter. Deny egress to prevent mass panic. Prioritize continuity. The word continuity carried a chill like seawater on a winter wound. Higher command had sanctioned the denials. The truth was worse than rumors. It was policy. She stopped the reel and listened to the after silence, the way you listen for a heartbeat when a room goes still. A nurse's notebook lay beneath the reel, pages mottled by damp. He had no choice but to close the gate when the shells fell short. The truth was worse than the rumors. She read the line aloud. It tasted of ash and iron. Necessity is the language of collapsing systems. It forgives nothing, but it explains the geometry of harm. In a corner, a small metal box, almost humble among the shelves, waited with a brass tag. The inscription was scribed with patient strokes, for the ones who did not pass the threshold. She set both palms on the lid and did not lift. The box felt warmer than the room. It contained ashes, she understood without seeing. She bowed her head, not in ceremony, but in recognition. The vault did not hold treasure. It held decisions that burned. The emotional pivot was ruthless in its clarity. This legacy was not heroism gilded or villainy sharpened. It was a ledger of constrained choices under orders, hunger, fear, and a coastline that could not widen its gates. She reached for another packet and found a dog tag, split cleanly down the middle, its stamped letters halved and raw. One half lay with the ring's oilcloth, the other had been pressed into the ash lid, edges nicked where a thumb had fitted, again and again. A personal penance ritual. He had made his name divisible so that memory could share the burden. She stood in the narrow aisle and breathed through the old air. Publish all and harm the living who had survived under borrowed names. Redact and risk dulling the truth until it could not cut through ignorance. Bury it again and betray the plea in the envelope. Keep the light. Time was running out. The generator's hum faltered to a stammer, reminding her that air and power were finite, and hesitation had a cost. She chose a middle path for the moment. She copied key pages, names paired with objects, events linked to dates, the directive's language transcribed without embellishment. She photographed the lighthouse drawing in angled light, preserving the impression of a child's pressure. She made rubbings of seals, captured ink flow, cataloged under neutral file names. She returned originals to their oilcloth beds, edges aligned as she had found them, not as she wished they had been. Then she pocketed the ring and the split tag half from the shelf, feeling the weight of both tokens against her palm. Chekhov's promise. Objects kept in Act 2 must answer in Act 3. She whispered to the shelves, a habit learned in archives. I will not let spectacle devour you. The vault did not answer. It didn't need to. A final ledger entry held its own act of resistance. An unreadable name, blurred by a thumb dragged through wet ink. Deliberate or accidental, it preserved ambiguity like a small shelter. She left it that way. Not all names must be recovered to honor what happened. Some must remain shoreline, present, eroded, persistent. As she closed the ledger, the wall speaker gave one last breath of static and died. The generator's thread thinned to silence. In the dark, her body knew the room's shape from minutes before. She slid the diaries back into place and touched the ashbox lid with 2 fingers. A farewell that was also a promise. She stepped into the corridor, the vault door easing toward shut, like a held breath released. The hill above felt nearer now, as if earth and concrete had shortened the distance between past and skin. She carried the copied pages flat against her chest and the tokens warm in her pocket. Honor the dead, protect the living, keep the light. She climbed, ready to face the world that would not listen until shown what rust and paper can prove. She felt the bunker shift from confidant to accomplice the instant the generator died. She needed to exit with evidence. Footsteps above turned soil into drumhead. Voices bled through the acoustic vents. The hills listening, explained by the way sound traveled in narrow throats of air. She crushed the urge to sprint. Speed makes noise. Noise draws hands. She killed every switch she'd tested, ensured the breaker lever lay down like a blade at rest. Power gone. Light gone. She mapped the route with touch, cord conduit, grit seam, the shallow nick she'd made with chalk on the way in, a cataloger's breadcrumb that did not glow but lived in muscle memory. Her breath found a rhythm. Count the paces, count the turns. Objects were her stars. The air tasted thicker, metallic. Time was running out. Stale atmospheres have limits. She slid her shoulder along the corridor's left wall, palm open, feeling where paint roughened into raw concrete. At the stair, she paused. Above, a pry bar worried an outer grate, and the steel sang in short, ugly notes. One voice hissed, "Keep it quiet." Another voice said, "It's abandoned, no one cares." The hill answered with silence. She did not. The hatch wheel waited at the top, a circle flowered with rust. She leaned, and it refused, corrosion gripping like a fist. Her first push yielded nothing. The second scraped a flake of scale into her eye. She blinked it away and listened downward, gauging how long before strangers became silhouettes. She had marked the wheel's set screw earlier, stripped into a near circle by decades of weather. Now the small ring in her pocket found new work. She looped the ring through a hole in her multi-tool and notched that improvised key into the ruined slot. The brass bit, slipped, then bit again. The phrase on the ring pressed into her palm. "For winter light." She turned, slow, feeling metal surrender a fraction at a time. The wheel twitched, then shifted, and, with a groan, the hatch unsealed. Cold morning bled down the stair like relief. She opened the hatch just enough to wedge a shoulder through, then froze. Two figures stood silhouetted against cloud-shot sky, faces shadowed by caps, posture wrong for hikers. One held a pry bar. The other kept glancing past her, unwilling to meet a stranger's eyes in a place that could judge intent. They claimed a salvage claim before she could speak, words rehearsed from arguments made at fence lines and courthouse doors. "This is public. It's derelict. We have a right." Across town, unaware of the danger, a retired lighthouse keeper checked his mailbox and found an envelope addressed in a precise, old-fashioned hand. The postmark was smeared. The paper smelled faintly of engine oil and salt. He turned it over with respect, not ready yet to break the past open. She stepped fully into the air, closing the hatch with her hip so the stair did not advertise itself. The two men spread slightly, a graceless attempt at control. "What did you find?" the pry bar man said, not accusing, already coveting. "Nothing worth carrying," she said, voice leveled the way archivists speak when handling fragile truth. Then she set the terms. She showed them the split dog tag, half name stamped and raw, and spoke the vault phrase with the cadence of those who have earned it. "Keep the light." The younger one flinched, as if a childhood rumor had just spoken from a living mouth. His eyes dipped to the tag, then to her pockets, then to the hill, calculating where belief ends and consequence begins. "My grandfather told that story," he murmured, voice shrinking so the wind could not steal it. "Said there was a man who fed some and turned others away, and that our people carried both facts like stones." The pry bar man snorted. "Stories don't pay," he said. But his grip had softened. She offered a bargain, not a threat. "I will not name living families without consent. The objects will stand where names cannot yet. You walk away now, and nothing in this ground will be taken as loot or turned into spectacle. If you press, the place closes, and only the worst version of the story survives." The younger one lowered his eyes. The older one studied the hill, hearing it listen. After a beat that held the weight of two hungers, money and memory, he shifted his tool to the ground. "Take your papers," he said, trying to make it sound like generosity. She nodded once. The agreement felt uneasy, which is how honest agreements feel when history sits between palms. As the door of the ridge's gate closed behind her, the outer grate she reset with steady hands, the hill exhaled. The world's noise returned thin and ordinary, a truck on the spur road, a gull crying inland, the brittle snap of frost lifting from grass. She walked without hurry, the copied pages flat against her ribcage, the ring and tag halves warming to her skin. The hill had listened. It had also warned. Now the living city would press in with its laws and its fears. She kept the light. She wanted to publish. The need felt clean. The path did not. Legal risks loomed like breakwaters, ethics braided through every page. She went first to a historian with quiet authority, a person who knew how to weigh paper against consequence. They sat in a room where light fell soft on stacks, and the clock did not urge. Together they verified signatures against declassified rosters, initials against beacon logs, handwriting against marginal marks in forgotten memos. The lighthouse registry bore a code phrase used in winter: "Keep the light for those at sea." The ring's inscription was not ornament, it was procedure and vow. A council learned of her work before she could brief them on terms. Reputation rehearsed its old defense. They threatened injunction, citing harm to a region's legacy, a way of saying silence is easier than nuance. She kept her voice measured. The ledger does not accuse, it records. That did not change the tremor in her hands when she left their hall, the way institutional walls can move closer without shifting an inch. Pattern interrupt came from the living. A descendant from a family marked turned away by order stepped forward, holding a photograph long kept in a drawer. Sepia faces looked toward a camera with winter in their eyes. A child clutched a lighthouse sketch with scalloped waves, the same naive curve as the drawing she had found in oilcloth. The proof did not shout. It breathed. The ring in her pocket fit the family's heirloom chain like an answer. The split dog tag half-matched a pendant they carried, its letters completing where hers ended. Two halves that had been set apart for penance rejoined not as absolution, but as recognition. With that joining came a mediated path. Publish, but with consent first. Tell cases as anonymized studies when names would harm. Name with explicit permission when descendants chose to carry their past into daylight. The exhibition took shape not as a victory lap, but as a memorial ledger, names on one wall by agreement, stories on another, where specific turns could wound. Objects stood where words could not yet stand. The ring, the ashbox, the ledger written in two inks, black for shipments sent, red for denials scribed deeper. The pressure of a hand visible under glass. She wrote the narrative in measured prose. No melodrama, a tone that allowed breath to expand within grief. Each caption named what the object proved and what it refused to reveal. The blueprint fragment went under angled light to reveal marginalia the naked eye missed. Not for inventory, only for conscience. The phrase moved from a private note to a public frame, the exhibition's subtitle. Visitors would not tour so much as witness. At the entrance, a simple card asked them to sign a promise to keep the light, carry forward care for those displaced by orders, in war or in peacetime systems that echo wartime harm. The council pushed back, then relented when testimonies gathered like incoming tide. The lighthouse keeper, brought the envelope that had arrived decades late. Inside lay a letter addressed to his predecessor, O's hand steady, asking the keeper to hold a signal on a night the ledger marked with too many red strokes. The envelope bore smudged postmarks, proof of a long detour through bureaucracies and time. In the gallery draft, that letter would rest beside a beacon log entry. 2 lines across history, aligned. She kept one ambiguity intact. A ledger entry, smudged beyond recovery, remained smudged in the display. The description read, "Unreadable name. Presence known by absence." In the talk she prepared, she planned to say the same line twice in different rhythms, to let responsibility and humility share the floor. The day before opening, she stood in the empty gallery, cases breathing quietly. She placed the ring and the reunited tag halves on faded cloth. The ash box sat near them, closed, its brass tag legible. She did not open it. That restraint was part of the story. Some respect is action. Preservation orders sealed the bunker, now documented and stabilized. The hill could rest. The story stepped into the light without betraying the dark. The archivist girl, who had walked rumor roads and listened to metal breathe, checked each label's final punctuation. Then she wrote a single sentence at the gallery's threshold on a card no larger than a palm. "We keep the light for those we cannot reach." She breathed. The path was not clean. It was faithful. She stood beside the glass case where half a dog tag and a simple ring rested on faded cloth, the gallery air heavy and still, like the pause between a question and an answer. The vault had not held treasure. It held a human ledger and the courage to read it. If you want more discoveries that ask you to feel and to think, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Join the journey and keep the light with The Archivist Girl. Don't miss the next hidden truth we unearth together.